Putting on not just your investor hat, but if you had to put your personal hats on as consumers, what opportunities do you think are really big that you're excited about and where you think big outcomes can get built in India?
The consumer story in India is just beginning right now.
So $110 to $20 billion of consumer spend pool. Over the next 3-4 years, this will likely double. Around 70-80% of this opportunity today is actually captured by marketplaces.
Marketplaces get so wedded to their TG that they started out with that they fail to address the needs of the newer incoming TG. And today we see that shift happening for Gen Z. Their consumption is driven more by meaning. They relate more to the brands that they purchase in. But one great example that comes to mind globally is Shein.
Supply is what the consumer sees first, right? When you truly get unique supply, you get that first really big access from a consumer backward lens. And that's why we focus so much on it. Classically, again, when you go back to e-commerce, I feel Nykaa is a great example.
Cool. Hello and welcome to SummitUp by Elevation Capital. Hi, I'm Vishy and I lead marketing at Elevation. Over the course of this series, I will speak with various folks in the sector practices at Elevation and try and uncover the opportunities and themes that deeply excite us in the Indian startup ecosystem. Whether you are a founder, a budding entrepreneur, or just someone who's deeply excited about startups, I hope there is something that you will find of value in this content series. In today's episode, we talk about the burgeoning opportunities in online marketplaces in India. We at Elevation have been part of the evolution of online marketplaces since the very early days. From the Web 1.0 days of Just Dial to Make My Trip and subsequently Made for Bharat marketplaces like Swiggy, Meesho and Urban Company, and vertical marketplaces now like No Broker and Spinny, we have seen a lot of this journey and we have been fortunate to have been partners with category defining companies. Today with me, I have Amit and Manish from the consumer tech team. They will be talking to us about their framework for creating bold and disruptive new companies in the online marketplaces opportunity. Hi Amit and Manish, welcome.
Hey Vishy.
Hey Vishy, good to be here.
So let me kick this off, Amit and Manish, with a question on what exactly are marketplaces for our audience and why is it that so much of consumer spends gravitate naturally towards marketplaces?
I can take that one. So I think, look, 2-3 things. Like if you define a marketplace fundamentally, you go back to the history of sort of time and civilization. Marketplace is nothing but a platform where buyers and sellers come together. I think where it becomes particularly exciting in the internet world is suddenly when you multiply this with access, scalability becomes very powerful. And so I'll talk a little bit about why are we fundamentally excited about marketplaces, right? I think a lot of us here and a lot of the audience would have been familiar with this classic flywheel of a marketplace, which is basically as you have more suppliers, you are able to get more supply, you're able to get more assortment at better prices. That attracts more buyers. Where more buyers show up, more sellers show up. And this goes over and over again, right? At the heart of it, I think this is what makes a marketplace truly powerful, that the network effects can play out at scale. And in turn, they create very, very strong barriers to entry. So tomorrow, if I want to go intersect this marketplace, it is very hard for me to do so. The second aspect which we really like about marketplaces, and this differs a little bit in the Indian context, and maybe we'll talk about that as we continue. But classically, marketplaces can be very asset efficient. Right? So you can be asset light, you can tap into an ecosystem of suppliers at the back and really spin out a high quality assortment which is available to your buyers, right? This allows better capital efficiency, this allows very high scalability. Now there are nuances to how some of these journeys have played out in India given the readiness of our supply side. Some of that we'll touch through the course of our conversation, but that's the second part which makes marketplaces very exciting for us as a construct in general. When I contextualize this in terms of the market opportunity, today we've done a lot of work on this. Our sense is that the online consumer spend in India today is around $110, $120 billion, give or take. This straddles across categories. So the interesting thing which I like to point out that only half of this is classical e-commerce as we think about it, which is very interesting because, when we think consumer internet and when we think spend, a lot of people just naturally think e-commerce, but that's not the case. There are very significant pools of spend which are setting outside of e-commerce. We obviously have seen those journeys closely. So, Spinny you spoke about a few of those. So Spinny is a part of those. Make My Trip is a part of those. Urban Companies, Swiggy, and so many more. But coming back, so $110-20 billion of consumer spend pool over the next 3-4 years, this will likely double. So we estimate this opportunity as around $200-250 billion 3-4 years down the line. But what is exciting is around 70-80% of this opportunity today is actually captured by marketplaces. So even in terms of size of the opportunity, the size of an outcome therefore you can build here, I think marketplaces present a very exciting view. And that sort of makes, sort of sums up our excitement around why we think marketplaces are so powerful.
Super. That's super interesting. I think adding on to a little bit of what you were saying, it seems inevitable that consumer spends are going to more than double the $110-120 billion opportunities, veering towards $250 billion. And at the same time, I think we take it as pretty much given that at a per capita level, the economy is going to march forward. The Indian consumer is going to move towards becoming a middle economy country, and GDP is going to grow from 2K to significantly higher from in a few years from now, right, Manish? So how do you see the expanding or the increasing affluence changing consumer spends?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Vishy. So exactly as you rightly pointed out, we believe that the consumer story in India is just beginning right now. And unlike other geographies like the US and China, where actually internet penetration happened after significant GDP growth, we are one of those geographies where internet penetration has already happened. And we are today sitting on that cusp of GDP rise over the next decade as we build out. So today, if you think about India, we are a $2,500 per capita income country. And by around 2030, there are a bunch of estimates out there which claim that we will be somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000. And this is a significant shift, almost doubling or tripling of the per capita consumption. And we've seen that across all major markets, the moment this transition happens, there is much deeper shift towards discretionary spends. So around at $750, around 50 to 60% of a person's consumption is mostly essential, whereas this shifts to 30-40% at $2,500, and at $5,000 to $10,000, essential consumption becomes around 10% of the basket, whereas the largest share is more towards discretionary spends. The interesting part is that this shift is not just in new categories, but in the core categories of the consumer, right? So if you think about consumption of fruits and vegetables, people move from bananas to avocados, right? As consumption, as the GDP per capita grows. Yeah. Similarly, if you think about education, people move from basic K-12 education to upskilling to study abroad, right? If you think about travel, people, instead of taking a trip a year, start taking a trip a month, right? And again, start exploring destinations outside the country. Similarly, there are new categories that open up, right? So there is an entire industry built around luxury apparel, luxury purchases. There is an entire industry built around unique experiences, right? And companies like Head Out, etc. in India have already solved for this category in other geographies, and we believe that India could be one of those geographies where things shape up in future as well. So again, as this transition happens, people move more towards discretionary spending. They move, and this shift happens across categories. The other interesting shift that happens with this increase in GDP per capita is more shift towards organized purchases, right? And by organized, I don't mean only products, but I also mean services. So people just start relying on organized intermediaries, services brands to service them. And as Amit mentioned earlier, I think Spinny is a great example of this happening in used car. UC is a great example of this happening across day-to-day necessities. And there are just so many facets of consumer services which are today untouched by the organized space.
Interesting. I would like to meet some of those guys who are doing monthly vacations.
Yep.
Having said that, I read through the thesis that we have put out on marketplaces and our framework around the axis that builders who are building in this space can look at for reference in terms of what can get built, right? One of the axes that we talk about is around unique supply, which I think talks about aggregating supply of goods and services that didn't exist prior in the market before that. Can you talk a little bit more in detail about that as to who do you see as having done a great job of having built a marketplace around that axis, and what lessons can somebody who's building now take out of that?
Sure. And I think when we talk about a framework, in fact, I feel supply is one of the most formative axes of that framework, right? And the reason I say that is because from a lot of those things are for a marketplace or a business to think about. All the other axes are relevant, but supply is what the consumer sees first, right? So in a lot of our conversations, when we meet, new founders, new companies being built out, right? And just as normal consumers, right? The first question we have is, but ye to yahan bhi milta hai. So why should I go there, right? And so in a way, when you truly get unique supply, you get that first really big access from a consumer backward lens. And that's why we focus so much on it. I think it also goes back to, what Manish spoke about is a lot of new categories will open up. Therefore, a lot of new spend buckets will open up. As the market, becomes more organized, it creates room for new brands. All of these are the right ingredients in place for marketplaces to come and start cornering new supply, right? Now, going to your question, Vishy, on saying what are some examples, I think some examples I think about which straddle a range of categories. I think classically, again, when you go back to e-commerce, I feel Nykaa is a great example, right? If you think back to 10, 12 years ago, counterfeit in beauty and personal care was a big problem. So, and I think that's one of the core insights that Nykaa was born out of. It was very common for people to buy on an Amazon, buy on a Flipkart, and then complain, hey, I'm not sure if this is real. This pack turned out to be open. So the bad experience was rampant. I think Nykaa started on that very core insight of saying, look, the consumer aspiration is growing. They're looking for new brands, new products. Those are not classically available on what is out there today. And as they've built out the platform, they've actually continued to build on that access. So today, there are a lot of Nykaa exclusive brands. They've made these deep partnerships to get a lot of global brands in India. And so for them, I feel it continues to remain a very, very core access in addition to the other ones. Very different category, and another company close to sort of home for us is obviously Urban Company. I think it's a very unique example of a category where they've created supply, where you would have classically not expected supply to be born, right? There was a lot of attempts. If you think back to, again, when Urban Company started, there was a slew of home services players in that market, right? That was almost the flavor of the season. I think over time, as the platform built out, they truly thought of actually giving rise to supply. So today, they run 250 odd training centers across the country. They very uniquely identify people, upskill people, get them ready for various jobs, and almost think of their progression as a career progression, make them a party in the company. So again, they've created supply in a category where you wouldn't classically think of or very intuitively, which will come to you. I think a third very unique example, if you look at a global example, I respect quite a bit, is Airbnb. And again, they've created very unique supply in a category which was not new. So category was travel, people were traveling, people were looking for places to stay. But approaching it from that insight of saying, hey, people have homes, people have extra space. This is underutilized, and could this serve as a great place for people to stay? For very unique kind of supply today, like today, Airbnb is known for very localized supply. A host runs it. You're able to immerse yourself into culture of a space. So not only did they again create new supply, they actually created an access which was very differentiated, and today is almost a cornerstone of their existence, right? A lot of, I know when I travel, I stay in an Airbnb just because I don't want the hotel experience. So not only is it unique supply, it's a very different kind of experience and proposition they built around it. But just some examples of supply that we think of.
Absolutely fascinating. So yeah, even I think it's been a decade since I've stayed in a hotel when I am traveling abroad. I think Airbnb has unlocked unique supply, but in a way, it has also just unlocked a new type of traveler itself, where people who did not feel like spending ostentatiously in a hotel stay suddenly feel that there is a lot more access for travel to them because they can go and do a homestay in Airbnb. Which brings me to the second axis that we have, right, Manish, which is marketplaces that are built by just unlocking new audiences and servicing either underserved or unserved audiences. Yeah. How do we think about that axis?
Oh, absolutely. So I think new audiences, in the order of priority, I would say the next biggest axis for creating a marketplace. And the reason I say that is because if you think about the generation of audience that is purchasing today on e-commerce or even generally any other platform, that generation was probably born multiple decades back, right? And it is for them that these marketplaces were created. And this we've seen across markets, that usually marketplaces get so wedded to their TG that they started out with, that they fail to address the needs of the newer incoming TG. And soon enough, there is another marketplace that comes and disrupts them, right? And today we see that shift happening for Gen Z. This is the audience, and I know everyone has a different definition, but at least classically, internally, we think of them as folks who were born after 97, 98, where internet penetration had started happening.
I just missed the cut.
Sorry?
I just missed the cut.
Yeah, same here. So these are folks who were born in this digital world, right? So they are digitally native. They spend 8 hours a day versus most of us would spend hopefully lesser in terms of digital consumption. And this is the audience that was born in the era where marketplaces existed, right? And they take all of the convenience, the price parity that marketplaces offer as a given. This audience, although, is materially different in its consumption and in its order of priorities of purchase in their lives, right? They at least, and these are some of the insights that folks from our brands team have shared, that their consumption is driven more by meaning. They relate more to the brands that they purchase in and feel that consumption is a way of self-expression, and hence they are much more cognizant about what they consume, where they consume it from. This audience also, in many cases, wants variety and is experimental. They are okay to experiment and figure out new areas, new brands, new formats of purchase. And hence we believe that that's one of the largest shifts that are happening in today's consumer base, around which things will be born. Today we are still early in that journey, and hence there aren't a lot of examples, but one great example that comes to mind globally is Shein. Shein innovated on the core insight that Zara and H&M had brought forth, right? That fast fashion relates to this audience, fast affordable fashion relates to this audience. But Shein actually innovated on this axis and disrupted the core model on another level. Today Shein has a 35x higher turnaround of SKUs inside their stores as compared to a Zara or an H&M. They are just much more faster, and in order to enable this, they had to actually innovate on every other axis. So although they built for the end consumer, which was new, they actually had to go all the way back into China, deeply integrate into their supply chains, and actually reconfigure the suppliers out there to enable this consumer to be served at a much faster pace, right? Also, if you think about the way they reached out to this consumer, they did not depend on Facebook or Google, right? They started spending on TikTok. They in fact tied up with most of the influential celebrities in the US on TikTok to ride on their audience and reach this consumer. So as you build for this consumer, it's not just this one axis, but 3-4 axes around which Shein got formed. And we believe that such similar opportunities will open up. And it's all about keeping your ears closer to the ground, listening to this consumer who today probably does not have a voice out there in most of the larger e-commerce platforms.
Interesting. Manish was talking about how Shein has built itself through a very unique way of just building the brand, talking to Gen Z where they are, which is on TikTok, right? And I think we have a thesis around how a unique GTM can be a powerful way to build a new marketplace. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. And actually I can talk about maybe both of the last two axes, and I feel like those are the two which go very hand in hand together. In the last two axes, we talk about better experience and then a very differentiated GTM. I think it seamlessly follows what Manish was saying, which is as the audience profile is changing, either because of Gen Z, which are becoming very significant in the consumption basket, or millennials are maturing. Millennials and, even boomers are getting used to digital experiences. So they're more immersed in that digital world, whether they want it or not. So fundamentally, I think we can all agree that the audience profile of today is very different from what it was a decade, 2 decades ago. Let's say when India first started seeing the internet. Now, what that translates into, therefore, to serve this audience, you need to offer them an experience which is very different. If you come back to Gen Zs, like Manish was saying, they want variety. Classically, I would have said 10 years ago, you want to get somebody to a purchase decision and get it fast. So get them what they want. What are they most likely to convert on? Compelling price, checkout, nothing should fail. That's not the case, right? Like Gen Z wants products, they want to engage with brands they associate with, right? Where they can see a mix of values coming out, which means they first want to see the entire spectrum, right? But that's sort of an antithesis of creating a marketplace, right? Because you will just lose the customer in details. Consequently, you have to rethink the experience of how you design some of these services and products, obviously very contextual to the category you're talking about. The second aspect is because of the change in how people are spending their time, where you speak to them and how you speak to them is also changing, which is nothing but GTM, in simplistic terms. If you talk about GTM, I think some very unique example, again, an example close to home is Meesho, right? Pre-Meesho era, there was a lot of talk around e-commerce for Bharat. I think the jury was already out saying, look, it seems tier 1 of India we've largely captured. The challenge seems to be on tier 2 of India. I think so it was not like that opportunity was undiscovered. Apparel was already a decent category online. So again, the category was not undiscovered either. So in Meesho's case, for example, I think the very unique insight that Meesho was built on is that this consumer, the classic Meesho consumer, actually needed somebody else to onboard them into the world of online commerce, right? In this case, it turned out to be, what Meesho called resellers in the first avatar were basically normal housewives, normal members of the society or the community who were able to take them on that guided journey of saying, look, this is what you can buy, this is available, and were actually the face of the platform in a lot of ways, right? And Meesho was almost in the background. So again, a very unique example of go-to-market that Meesho uncovered, which obviously became a big driver of success for them. Another example, I think, in a similar breadth is something like City Mall. Again, City Mall is a portfolio company which focuses on grocery for, long tail of Bharat and India. And there the insight is they almost onboard these community leaders or community champions who are able to aggregate demand in their local clusters and consequently are able to serve them a lot more effectively and a lot more economically, right? So just some examples of GTM. I think a very different example, again, I think about in the global context is something like a Tinder. In early days, Tinder actually started off as dorm parties. They used to create this hype around some big fancy dorm party happening somewhere, and people would just discover something called a Tinder. I think you needed the app to even get access to it. So nothing to do with that, but were able to reach out to the right audience in a very fun, informal setup and make the brand known. So it's as offline as we get. A lot of times we as VCs think about GTM needs to be online, but that's not the case, right? Like whatever floats your boat really is the answer. Coming to the other axis, we also spoke about experience in the same breath, right? And I think a great example there, I think of, Manish spoke of Shein, which has been one of those very defining platforms of the last few years. I think the other revolution which is playing out now is actually Temu. Right? And a lot of people you speak to will say, hey, this is supply which was always on Alibaba Express. So what is new? The world knew you could get stuff from, China. Alibaba Express was already doing that. It has a fairly decent penetration into the states where Temu is a dominant player now. I think what is unique is Temu made fun out of buying like regular cheap household stuff, right? Suddenly you have a feed. Suddenly every day or every time you open the Temu app, you are seeing a hyper customized feed, which is personalized for you depending on, what you might like, what you engage with. So it's almost social meets whimsical fast commerce in a very unique way. And I think that's a great example of unique experience. It's same old categories were always available. Classically, you would say, so what's new? But the experience is just so unique. And going back to some of our points, I think now they've built enough scale where you just can't match Temu prices, right? Now Alibaba Express just can't get close to Temu prices because Temu will choose to sell 100 products a day and you will never get them on prices on those and they will still take economics on that, right? So just sort of brings experience and the power of marketplaces back together in one go.
Super interesting. This is great. If I were to sort of replay some of my experiences through a lot of the events that we've been doing of late, meeting early stage founders at our Kickstarters around marketplaces, I think invariably a lot of the early stage founders seem to initially have this feeling of fear that, all large marketplace opportunities are almost tapped out in India, and और क्या बनेगा यहाँ पर, right? Or there are already big gorillas, 500-pound gorillas sitting in the room, and there possibly isn't much to do here. But clearly, if I think through it through the framework of these 4 axes, and none of these axes actually are playing singularly, right? I think anybody who's done well has managed to do well and completely disrupt the incumbent by playing on multiple axes. So I think there is the opportunity clearly just seems to be ripe for the taking, and there seems a lot that can be done. While you've spoken as investors, putting on not just your investor hat, but if you had to put your personal hats on as consumers, what opportunities do you think are really big that you're excited about, that you're excited to see get tapped into by bright entrepreneurs out there, and where you think big outcomes can get built in India? I know, Amit, you're excited about pets.
I can kick off. I think, and again, like you said, talking not as an investor, but as usual consumers. And that's the exciting part, right? Because we all intersect these problems in our everyday lives as well. I think obviously pets for me is a space close to my heart. I've been a long-term pet parent. And I keep coming back to this thought of saying, look, something will get built in that space. I think the other nuance playing out here is, again, if you look back 10 years, right? A lot of these categories we would classically not think of as a dedicated play, because we would say, look, in the Indian context, it's just not big enough. How will you build a big outcome here? Then you will need to do more. Then you will intersect an Amazon and Flipkart, and then those gorillas will beat you, right? So what else can you do? I think the nuance that is playing out now, and again goes back to the increasing middle income in India, the overall affluence playing out, is a lot of these categories are now becoming sizable, or will definitely become sizable in the next 5-7 years, right? Which is the horizon, let's say, to build a meaningful outcome. So pets, I think, is classically one of those, right? Like, we've done a lot of work on this category. Even from number, it's a $1 billion category today, growing 2x of classic e-com in India. Pet ownership in general is on the rise. There are a lot of cultural and affluence factors which are linked to that. But this is one of those markets which could be a 5 billion odd space, 3-5 years down the line, right? So again, presents an opportunity for something new to be created. Could be fairly nuanced. I think the pet basket is very different. It's not just classic commerce. It's also services. It's also grooming. It's also healthcare, right? So what the play of the future looks like, I think it will have to bring a lot of this together. It will probably also need to be offline. I think a large part, it's hard for me to imagine like pets as a category being completely online and being completely dissociated. So how does all that come together? I think is a great, but there are a lot of great founders who are building, who had figured out some of the other wedge into this category, right? And so some of these we admire their journeys and we look at it pretty closely, but pets is one of those. I think another category, and this is very recent for me, we moved into a new place recently, and as we were setting it up, we just wanted things which are a little bit better, a little bit nicer. There's also been a lot of brands in the home and home decor space, right? And then you want to see what they have to offer. You just want to see what's out there before you buy some things, and anything, right? Could be all the way from linen to, let's say, cutlery to glassware, right? But across the board, I think the option set has changed and evolved quite a bit, right? And that led me to the realization that home is probably, another one of those categories, right? Like today it's nested within a Myntra or an Ajio or a Tata Click. I guess under the assumption that that's where the core user is. So this is another part of their basket, right? The millennial woman is probably the core TG and they're big influencers into a home journey. So, I don't catch them there. I think it has just so much depth and nuance that these guys can't serve it, right? It's typically like the 5th, 6th tab on a Myntra, hidden under a big menu. They obviously can't do justice to the category. They would rather fight the apparel battle itself. So that's another one. Sports and nutrition, I think, again, like one macro trend I feel that's happening is our countries in general, as we have a lot of younger people coming in, right? Like, we are getting a lot more focused about fitness, about health in general. So sports, nutrition, maybe nutraceuticals as a category, like folds into some of these journeys. But again, I think it's nuanced enough to require dedicated place. So maybe verticals, I feel the larger theme I'm talking about is saying, look, I think we're at that point in India where a lot of vertical marketplaces will come up, and some of these categories are meaningful enough to now branch out and become big.
Super. Super.
Just adding on to what Amit talked about, the other thesis that is close to heart for a bunch of us in the fund is in PropTech, and the thesis is around building a spinny but for homes, and the reason is close to heart. So personally, I've recently begun searching for a home in this exorbitantly overvalued real estate market in India, and the biggest struggle that I've realized is that the transaction journey for purchase of a secondary home is so starkly underwhelming as compared to purchasing a primary home. And the big difference is that if you, let's say, go today to buy a home from DLF where they're launching a new property, you don't have to worry about documents. You don't have to worry about loans because you're immediately connected to banks. You don't have to worry about even genuineness of the seller on the other side, right? You are in fact taken into a air-conditioned room. You are served tea, coffee. You've got everything out there just to help you complete that transaction journey. Whereas in the secondary home market, even today, irrespective of presence of multiple classified platforms out there, you end up with a broker. And this broker in most cases is not connected to the seller. He's connected to another broker who is probably connected to hopefully another broker who can get you to the seller, right? And this is one of the largest purchases that you are making in your life. So that journey today, I believe, we all still believe is deeply broken. And we believe that an intermediary is needed here who can actually give you the experience of a primary home purchase, but when you are going after the resale transaction, right? And resale in itself as a market is around 90% of the real estate market in India. So that's a major gap today. And if you draw parallels from what's happened in Latin America or in Europe or in the US or even in China, right? In every geography, there have been multiple players that have sprung up, which have actually ended up solving this problem for secondary transactions. So we believe that's one of the other largest opportunities out there. The other space that I will add in closing is grocery. Today, we all feel that grocery is solved, but we internally do believe that grocery still continues to be unsolved, especially for affluent consumers. Today, grocery platforms have solved for convenience, but they haven't fundamentally solved for the products that you consume, right? And whether it's fresh, whether it's even packaged snacks or products that you consume, we believe that there is possibility of creating a platform which is more better for you or good for you, right? And creating sort of like an equivalent of a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods in the US. And this again need not be purely online, but this could be a blend of online and offline as it gets created.
Super fascinating. Thank you so much, Amit and Manish. I think we have given a lot of food for thought for budding entrepreneurs out there thinking about building in marketplaces. I would urge anybody who's watching this series, if you feel like discussing with the team, to reach out with us. We're always happy to connect with founders and potential founders and brainstorm on their ideas. I would also urge you to check out our website. We have a 3-piece article on marketplaces, which you can read through. It has a lot more details on what we covered today in terms of our 4-axis framework. And do reach out to us for a conversation on what you're building on our framework or anything beyond that.